Is it just me, or does the topic of nuclear war seem to be coming up a lot lately? It's a very disturbing trend to me. As a kid growing up, I was born in the 80s, and it always felt like the Cold War was kind of a thing of the past. I have a vague recollection of the Berlin Wall coming down, seeing that on the news. And after that, the world was supposed to be returning to peace, right? And of course, we know that the world is a much more complicated place than that, but really, at no point in my life do I ever recall being particularly concerned about a nuclear exchange or nuclear warfare. But that all does seem to be changing now. The latest update is that the Pentagon has released a new national defense strategy. And this is the headline from today from Bloomberg. Pentagon strategy won't rule out nuclear use against non nuclear threats. And this is part of the statement from the Defense Department. By the 2030s, the United States will, for the first time in its history, face two major nuclear powers as strategic competitors and potential adversaries. In response, the U.S. will maintain a very high bar for nuclear employment without ruling out using the weapons in retaliation to a non-nuclear strategic threat to the homeland, U.S. forces abroad, or allies. To me, that's a fairly disturbing statement that now the Defense Department, the Pentagon, stating that they are willing to use nuclear weapons as a first strike to combat a conventional threat against a U.S. ally. That seems like some insane brinksmanship to me. I guess that things on the geopolitical front are becoming so uncertain and so risky that the Pentagon feels like they need to, appear very tough here and acknowledge that they're willing to use a nuclear weapon in a first strike capacity. I mean, what does that mean exactly? Does it mean that if Russian tanks start rolling into Poland, that we're willing to use nuclear weapons, either tactical or strategic, to defend our NATO allies? I mean, that could be what it means. And they weren't real specific about what conventional forces they would consider retaliating against with nuclear weapons. So maybe that example about tanks rolling into Poland is a bit of hyperbole. There are also, of course, some conventional threats that we may not have a very good conventional counter to, like Russia and China's hypersonic weapons, a technology that they've been focusing on a lot lately. Maybe that's what the Pentagon's talking about. Again, they weren't real clear, but the mere fact that this is now on the table, a possible nuclear first strike by U.S. forces, should be of concern to everybody. And, it's not just us, of course. There's been a lot of nuclear brinksmanship this year, a lot of it from the Russians, from Vladimir Putin himself, from Dmitry Medvedev. Russian nuclear doctrine is that they will use a nuclear weapon to defend against existential threats to the Russian state and also possibly to defend Russian soil. And that's another potential disaster in the making, as they've now annexed parts of eastern Ukraine. And so now they consider those areas of Ukraine to be Russian soil. So, our nukes on the table to defend those areas against Ukrainian invasion. This is the sort of talk that we've been hearing. And I'm not trying to go to bat for either side here, because I'm just pointing out what these world leaders are saying and what these militaries around the world are saying. This is a book titled Nuclear War Survival Skills. It's written by Crescent H. Kearney. This is a 1987 edition. There's an update from 2001. This is a book I've had for a while. My dad got this for me many, many years ago as a gift. And I mean, at the time, I got to say, nuclear war wasn't really a major concern for me. Although, I at least have always been aware of the fact that there are a lot of nuclear weapons pointed around the world, nations pointing these weapons at one another. And it was kind of always on the back burner. But now this seems to be a very prescient gift. And I'm going to put a link in the description to a PDF copy of this book that you can get for free. And what this is basically a enhanced civil defense manual. I mean, it's got everything you might need, from plans for expedient shelters to charts and graphs regarding fallout and how long radioactivity lingers. And this is a very interesting book. One of the things that the author points out is that there's a lot of misconceptions about nuclear war and how even in the event of an all-out strategic exchange, it's probably not going to wipe out humanity entirely. I mean, hundreds of millions of people will die, and it'll be a horrific event, probably the most horrific in human history. But still, hundreds of millions of others are going to survive, and they're going to need to figure out how to live in that post nuclear war world. So definitely this is worth checking out at any time, really. It's of interest, I think, to anybody, or it should be of interest to anybody, but especially these days, this is definitely a book that you want to take a look at. If you need one book for surviving nuclear war, this is probably going to be it. But I would rate, despite all of the brinksmanship and the tough talk that we're hearing from countries around the world regarding nuclear weapons, the risk of an all-out strategic, suicidal, mutually assured destruction kind of exchange is still very low. Now, I mean, it's a lot higher than it was last year. If you had told me last year that I would be worried about a nuclear war, I would have known something would have been up because it wasn't on my radar at all, really, 12 months ago. But nowadays, that at least is some kind of a credible threat, but still a very, very low risk event. I mean, I don't think that, or at least I hope that mankind is not stupid enough to be so suicidal as to just, toast the whole planet and threaten at least the species' existence. But the real risk from a nuclear weapon, and the reason I'm talking about this today, is because even a low yield nuclear weapon, a tactical or battlefield weapon, risk posed from the use of a weapon like that is tremendous. And it has nothing to do with what occurs on the battlefield. And the risk of one of those weapons being used is very real. I think it's absolutely a possibility that this conflict that we see in Ukraine could get out of hand in a major way, and a tactical nuclear weapon could be used, or maybe there will be a false flag of some sort. There's been a lot of talk about that. Now, I'm trying to get this video censored by YouTube, and I'm not lending any credence to any claims from either side in this conflict, but I'm just pointing out that the use of some kind of a small tactical nuclear weapon or dirty bomb or something like that, whether it be, quote unquote legitimate or a false flag or what have you, it's a very real possibility. And the real threat from that, again, it's nothing to do with what happens on the battlefield. It's a financial and an economic threat, because right now, I mean, we are on the verge of a massive economic crisis here in the US and around the world. We've got tremendous energy crisis in Europe, around the world. Inflation is out of control. You've got this de-dollarization. You've got Saudi Arabia. They're threatening to join the BRICS nations, and they're in control of the petrodollar arrangement. So the US dollar is facing these tremendous threats like never before. It's on the verge of possibly losing its status as the world reserve currency. That's not going to happen without some kind of a major event. But listen, a nuclear weapon going off, no matter how big, is a major event, absolutely. And if we see something like that happen, and I'm not trying to forecast any specific event, it just seems like the risk is a lot higher now than it ever has been before. If we do see Russia detonate a tactical nuclear weapon, or the Ukrainians, or, if China invades Taiwan and that gets out of hand, again, the US now stating that they're willing to use a nuclear weapon against a conventional threat. What does that mean? We don't know. Maybe that would be to stop an invasion of Taiwan. Now, again, that doesn't seem likely to me, but it's more likely than it was yesterday, now that we see this new national defense strategy. So if any of this pops off, global markets are set to be absolutely routed and destroyed. I did a video yesterday about the diesel shortage that's going on in the US right now, how trucking is potentially going to come under some pressure as we see the price of diesel fuel spiking up, and how there's only 25-day supply left, and how US refineries are already maxed out. Well, listen, if we see a nuclear weapon go off, that diesel crisis, that's going to become a huge global energy crisis. It's going to spiral out of control. I mean, think about it. Russia exports 7.5 million barrels of petroleum every single day. If we see a nuclear weapon go off somewhere in Ukraine, you think we're going to be buying any of that oil? You think that oil is going to keep flowing around the world? That'll be shut off overnight. I mean, this will be the trigger for, one, the economic warfare and the sanctions and the embargoes that we've seen to just spiral absolutely out of control. I mean, it depends on what happens specifically, but guaranteed, global trade is going to suffer in a very big way if we see some kind of a nuclear event or a nuclear escalation, because that's going to push these conflicts to a whole new level. And there's going to be the risk of more militaries being drawn into these conflicts, of them expanding in scope, size, and geography. The use of a nuclear weapon is a huge game changer. And global financial markets are so vulnerable right now. There's so much debt. We're already on the verge of recession. We're heading into an environment of stagflation with rising prices for consumers across the board. and yet the Fed tightening policy and triggering an economic recession. So we're already in a very vulnerable position. And now this rhetoric from places like the Pentagon and also what we've seen from other players around the world, it's really a risk that I don't think is being taken into account. A lot of the coverage of this topic focuses on the military and the strategic and tactical outcomes from this type of warfare. But all of that I think is immaterial because the shockwaves through markets, that's the real risk. And it's a lot more dangerous because, a tactical nuclear weapon, take the smallest nuclear weapon ever developed, the Davy Crockett. It's like a man-portable nuclear weapon developed by the United States. It has a projectile, it's about 20 tons of TNT equivalent, so very small compared to even the bombs that were used in World War II on Japan. Very small in comparison. Now, it is big in comparison to, say, a conventional bomb. The biggest explosive that the United States military uses that's a conventional weapon is the Moab, mother of all bombs. It's the equivalent of about 5 tons of TNT. So don't get me wrong, 20 tons of TNT is still a big explosion. But I mean, the battlefield meaningfulness of a weapon like that pales in comparison to the economic fallout from such a weapon's use, for all the reasons that I just discussed. What does all of this mean for us? There's a tremendous risk of these conflicts expanding and nuclear weapon tanking markets. We're all very over leveraged. There's a lot of fragility in the system. Well, there's a few things that I think would be wise to do to get prepared. I mean, first of all, get a copy of this. It's free. Again, link down in the description. Take a look at it. Familiarize yourself with what a nuclear exchange and what a nuclear explosion actually entails. Give yourself some good information. Another thing that I think would be wise to do would be to move into physical, tangible assets, because in a world on the brink of potential World War III, where there are trillions of dollars in unfunded liabilities, trillions of dollars in debt, quadrillions potentially in derivatives out there, I personally want wealth in something disconnected from all of that. So gold and silver, they've stood the test of time for thousands of years. That is one of the things I am doing to get prepared. And I think it's just a good idea in general to prepare with physical metals for all of the threats that we're facing at the moment. Economic collapse doesn't necessarily have to be triggered by a nuclear war. In fact, I think it's kind of baked into the cake at this point, no matter what happens as far as the conflict goes. But a nuclear weapon would certainly be the kind of catalyst that could kick off, complete devaluation of the dollar. I mean, think about what better excuse would the Fed have to pivot and reverse policy and to print a ton of money, which we know central bankers love to do. What better excuse would they have than a nuclear weapon? It's hard to imagine a better excuse for them to pivot than a nuclear weapon going off somewhere, right? Because who could be blamed for coming to the aid of a crashing economy when a nuclear weapon has just been used? And think about that. Think about how that mere fact is something which unfortunately raises the potential of one of these weapons being used because of the way this world works. If you want to get the best deal on silver right now, I'd probably go for something like one of these 1 kilo bars. They seem to have the lowest premiums attached to them at the moment. Of course, you can always go for something like a Peace dollar or a Morgan dollar, but the premiums on these older coins have gone up quite a bit. If you want something smaller or fractional, this is one of my favorite pieces of silver, this 5-ounce Cuauhtémoc Aztec calendar round. They've got all these over at SD Bullion. Right now, SD Bullion's also having a sale on their 1 kilo Proclaim Liberty silver bars. So if you want to get a low premium kilo, that is a nice one to take a look at the moment. But so for financial preparedness, I think that at least having some portion of your assets stored in hard assets like physical gold and silver is a good preparation to prepare for the event of an economic collapse, a revaluing of the currency, the loss of the dollar status as the world reserve currency, and possibly, the economic fallout from a nuclear war. Now, another thing I would recommend getting, some food, because remember, you can't eat your gold and silver, and of course, you can't eat your paper currency either, but one thing you can eat is stuff like this Mountain House freeze-dried food. They're not a channel sponsor or anything. It's just really good product. It tastes good, it's nutritious, and it lasts for up to 30 years if you get it in these number 10 cans. Now, the prices on this stuff have been rising considerably along with all other types of food, but even if we don't get a nuclear war or a major conflict or anything like that, a nice thing is that you can kind of lock in the price of your food by buying food like this now that has a super long shelf life. And, folks, before you go out and buy cases and cases of this stuff, I would suggest you try some of it to make sure it's compatible with your palate, because I can't imagine what would be worse than having a bunch of emergency food that tastes, not so great to you. Well, I guess one thing that would be worse would be starving, but nonetheless, do a little research onto this stuff. But to me, Mountain House, their home-style chicken noodle casserole is delicious. And I like to eat Mountain House occasionally. It's not something I'm eating all the time, but I do like it. And if you go camping or anything, it's amazing. And really, just to make dinner sometimes, it tastes pretty good. And another thing you might want to get, the Mountain House food is kind of a luxury prepper item, if you ask me. It's not the cheapest thing in the world, but it is still really cheap, although it's not as cheap as it was a year ago, is rice, beans, peas, all the staple dry goods that, you can rely on. They'll keep you fed, they'll keep your belly full. And one way I like to store these is to take these Mylar bags, fill them up with your dry goods, and then drop in an oxygen absorber and a desiccant, and this stuff will be good for a really long time. Now, one thing you do want to do is make sure you store these bags in some kind of a hard container, either a 5-gallon bucket or a Tupperware or something like that, because these bags can get punctured pretty easily, and then, they're not going to stay fresh for very long. Please forgive my horrible handwriting and smeared marker on this bag, but, it's not about how pretty it is, it's about how long it can keep you fed if there's no food in the supermarkets. And I was talking about how vulnerable so many things are in our economy right now. Well, one of the other incredible vulnerabilities that we have is our system of food distribution, the just-in-time delivery system. That ties in with that diesel fuel shortage. It ties in with the risk of an economic collapse. If any kind of major disruption comes through our system, we are very fragile, very vulnerable. The average city, I think, has something like 72 hours worth of food on the shelves. And we've gotten a preview of this in recent years. You know what I'm talking about, where there were shortages and supply chain disruptions. Well, trust me, folks, if a nuclear weapon goes off somewhere, doesn't matter where it is, anywhere in the world, any size, nuclear weapon, dirty bomb, what have you, again, it's not about the potency of the bomb. It's about the perceptions and the risk and the escalation that all of that entails. What that will do to markets will make these shortages that we saw in the past couple of years look like child's play, because the global supply chain system, we know it is extremely vulnerable, and the kind of shock we would get from a weapon like that being used could absolutely decimate it. So, get yourself some physical assets, folks. Of course, not financial advice. I got to point that out. I'm not a financial advisor at all. I'm just some weird prepper guy on YouTube who likes stacking silver. But what I'm doing is getting my hands on some physical, tangible assets. I'm also trying to get my hands on as much food as possible, keeping a nice pantry, keeping that stocked. And, of course, in addition to the rice and the freeze-dried stuff, also good idea to have just, the basic canned foods in your pantry. Get some extra ones. That's the first step towards having a food stockpile. Just get more of what you regularly eat that has a long shelf life. That's sort of like the FEMA version of preparedness, have like 72 hours worth of food in your house, or have a week's worth of food in your house. And to me, it's shocking that there's people out there that don't have that, that they don't have enough food in their home for their next meal, and they need to either go to a restaurant or go to a store just to get food within the next 24 hours. Don't be one of those people, folks. It's not financial advice, but that is just life advice. Keep some food in your house. Eat more at home. You'll be healthier for it. Your budget will do better, and also you'll be more prepared. And with inflation the way it is, even if none of this stuff comes to pass, we know that the dollar's purchasing power in absolute terms is dropping like a stone. In relative terms, it's going up, the US dollar index. But if you're trying to buy groceries with dollars, it is losing its purchasing power. So getting your hands on some basic foodstuffs now is likely to save you money no matter what happens. So anyway, this video is really kind of running on. I just wanted to talk about the risk of a nuclear war, and how the real risk has nothing to do with the nuclear weapons at all. It has to do with the economic risk, which is just as dangerous and can result in just as many deaths. Starvation, that's a very real risk to a lot of the vulnerable populations around the world, hundreds of millions of people living hand to mouth, and any major disruptions to fuel, energy, agriculture, distribution, any of those things is going to lead to a lot of misery around the world. And that's the real risk we face from a nuclear weapon. So thank you very much for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you took something away from it valuable. Leave me a comment down below to let me know what you think about all the topics I covered today. And I do just want to say a big thank you to everybody for watching. Hope you all are staying safe, happy stacking, and I will catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker, out.